The Climate of History in a Planetary Age is a book by the distinguished historian from Chicago University, Dipesh Chakrabarty. His subject is history, but he has felt the need to talk about the history of climate change before we can talk about its resolutions. He has felt that you cannot understand climate change unless you understand it in wholeness, in thinking in terms of history. And the thing is that when he talks about history, he wants us to move out of that domain of human history. He says that human beings live on the planet, but there is a difference between human history and planetary history. So human events are counted from human history. And what is human history? The rise and fall of civilizations, wars, various empires coming in and going out. So according to him, that is just history, that is human history and of recorded time. But the history of the planet is much more vast than that, which means that when we have to talk about history in the context of climate change, we have to take all history in combination. We cannot isolate human history because human beings are part of the universe. So his aim in this book is to talk about human history and planetary history, which he thinks are the one, because human beings are part of the planet. He sees a great divide. Nobody talks about the plant life or the life of nature, which has existed long before, for thousands of millennia before man came on the scene. So his attempt is to bring out this idea, to break this attitude of talking about human-centric history. He feels that human time is very short and we have to consider the whole of the earth in this context. And when we think of all human achievements and civilizations and wars, we tend to be focused only on human beings. But the truth is that everything has come out of the earth. All the wars, all the civilizations that existed in history, they originated from the earth. For example, the coming of the wheel, when the wheel came in, from the Bronze Age and the Iron Age and all those ages, everything was coming from the earth, and yet human history is isolated from nature. So he tries to reconcile us to this fact that we have to think of history, which is one history, and in terms of planetary history. And so the time scale that we use to measure human activity, that is very limited. He says, to begin with, human beings were not the agents of change on the planet. It was nature that was an agent of change. But today, man has made himself an agent of change and an agent of destruction, and changing climate in such a way that when the dinosaurs were wiped out, the intensity of climate change at that time, that is exactly the intensity that is happening today, but that is created by human activity. Let us look at this video. This video tells us about this important book, and his 4 theses are very important about this idea of human history and planetary history. He says, if the planet were given a voice, then wouldn't polar bears be asked what they want? wouldn't other animals and other life be addressed? So it may seem very idealistic, but it also is very meaningful that human beings have a very small um, time period in comparison to the time period of the existence of the earth.
In order to acquaint students with environmental history in India, the most recent debates generated by Chakrabarty's 2009 essay, The Climate of History, 4 Theses, and Amitav Ghosh's 2016 nonfiction book, The Great Derangement. The conversation unites the disciplines of history and literature in thinking about why climate change is markedly absent from most of our narratives. We find mention of climate change in scientific discourse and even more so in nonfiction. It's interesting that Amitav Ghosh actually comes to the question while writing a work of fiction. When researching his work, The Hungry Tide, which was published in 2004, Amitav Ghosh notes that there overnight a stretch of riverbank would disappear, taking houses and people with it. This is particularly evident in the Sundarbans, which is a hotspot really for climate change activity in terms of what's visible. And Ghosh found it insane that literature was not tackling this question. He therefore writes this work called The Great Derangement, which is a testimony to the fact that we are missing this narrative of large-scale climate change, and begins his work by referencing Dipesh Chakrabarty's essay that came out in 2009 in Critical Inquiry called The Climate of History. In The Climate of History, Dipesh Chakrabarty is asking why the discipline of history itself is unable to capture what is significantly different about what is called the Anthropocene. The Anthropocene is an era of human-induced climate change where humans themselves have become geological agents. Dipesh Chakrabarty claims that the same faculty that allows us to picture the past also allows us to imagine the future. The discipline of history exists on the assumption that our past, our present, and our future are connected by the continuity of human experience. In looking at the history of history, Dipesh Chakrabarty notes significantly that, and this is his first thesis, that the distinction between natural history and human history is a distinction that has to be dropped in this new era. So the first thesis is that anthropogenic climate change spells the end of age-old humanistic distinctions between natural history and human history. The assumption was that all history was the history of human affairs. And if one were to compare human timelines with geological timelines, the pace of change feels very, very slow in the case of human history. Given that we have entered the era of the Anthropocene, Chakrabarty wants us to remember that we are no longer separate. In a sense, we ourselves are part of the environment in terms of changing it. And so he believes that this collapse that separated the natural from the historical man-made worlds requires a unity now in order to fully understand what this Anthropocene era has to offer. His second thesis is about the emergence of humans as a geological force again, and how this severely qualifies histories of modernity and globalization. As Gadamer says, every historian knows history could have been different. The Anthropocene has sort of questioned the idea of progress and the teleology of what modernity was to offer. Several works that Chakrabarty mentions, such as The Future of Life, The Weather Makers, Global Warming, are all questioning if human freedom has been placed under a cloud in the era of the Anthropocene. This leads him to his third thesis, which is that the Anthropocene requires us to put global histories of capital in conversation with species history of humans. The argument that we must mix these two histories comes from the fact that capitalism has also always changed, but in a sense this is to be also seen as a species history. He mentions that in modernity and early modernity, we move really in the archives of the last 400 years, and history needs to be viewed not just in that sort of short time frame, but really in the longer scale. And so for that, to think in species terms changes the way in which the discipline itself functions. This finally brings him to his fourth thesis, which is that we can probe the limits of historical understanding by cross-hatching these two histories, the history of capital and the history of the species. He says that one doesn't experience concepts as we are working at the limits of human understanding. Because climate change challenges us collectively, it calls for a global approach to global politics, which would then beg the question of how we view ourselves in terms of location, both in terms of time and in terms of natural time as a species, as well as in terms of our own sort of history, recent history of modernity.
So the video showed the four theses by Dipesh Chakrabarty and also talked about capitalism as a major cause for all the destruction of nature, and capitalism identifying humanity as the center of the universe. As climate change becomes a central issue in global politics, economics, and social justice, the role of non-fiction writing is shaping public perception and driving action will only deepen. So, as more complex issues occur related to global politics, ethics, economics, or social justice, the role of non-fiction writing will also be refined further, and it will grow more complex in trying to shape public perception and trying to incite or drive action against climate change. The role of non-fiction in raising awareness and driving action. Climate change non-fiction serves as a vital tool for raising public awareness and driving collective action. Through detailed research, personal storytelling, and investigative journalism, non-fiction authors have a unique capacity to engage readers intellectually and emotionally. So, investigative journalism has an aim of trying to report things as they are, but it also manages to engage readers intellectually and emotionally. And the change comes in by bringing in climate change as something real and not imaginary, as not something abstract, but something that is a concern for today and should be attended to today. So it brings the abstract concept of climate change into stark humanized terms for illustrating its impact on ecosystems, economies, and communities worldwide. So public awareness is important, and non-fiction in climate change plays a big role in that. It engages people, it informs them, it enlightens them, and it helps them to make decisions. And many of these climate non-fiction books have gone to bestseller lists, showing that people are very appreciative of this genre and people want to read more of it. So some of the books that we are discussing are on the best-selling list and are considered very important books in relation to climate change and in relation to resolution of climate change. So informing and educating the public is very important. Many governments which are in lobbies with the informing and educating the public is important. Many governments and many companies which want to mislead the public and cover up the stark issues of climate change. They do not want such things to be known. But the role of non-fiction is first and foremost educational. It is meant to inform the public and to educate the public. By translating complex scientific data into accessible language, writers help demystify the science of climate change. So, in today's day and age, with the proliferation of studies which are interdisciplinary in nature, there is more and more accommodation on part of readers to reading scientific facts, because climate non-fiction deals with it in a way that the public may understand it. So there are many such books out there which may be talking about scientific facts, but they are read or they are written in an accessible language, so the people may know what is really the scientific process behind climate change. So many young activists, youth activists of the world have tried to bring about this study of climate non-fiction and climate fiction in school courses. Many NGOs are running workshops to inform and educate young people about the urgency of climate change. Books such as The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells and The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Kolbert provide clear explanations of how rising global temperatures, biodiversity loss, and environmental degradation are interconnected with each other. So these writers talk about the various facets of climate change, about rising global temperatures, about biodiversity, about environmental degradation, and all these are interconnected, and there are various movements, as we discussed earlier. All these are further strengthened through climate non-fiction. So this book, Plastic Soup, An Atlas of Ocean Pollution by Michael Rosencamp-Abing, is a major work about the pollution of the ocean by plastics. So you can look at the title, Plastic Soup. What is plastic soup? Soup is something that one drinks, made of vegetables and pulses, or maybe of chicken. What is plastic soup? So this soup is something that is consumed, and here it is plastic soup. It is a soup or a mixture made of plastics which is consumed by human beings. So this is what they mean to say, that the ocean is polluted, but the plastic soup comes to us from the ocean. And how well the plastic soup has been shown in the form of a dangerous fish which is swallowing the earth. So water and the oceans are a major part of the earth, and we already know that they are clogged with plastic. But there are other startling facts about plastic which this book reveals. So in this way, this book is worth reading. This book is worth reading if one wants to know about how plastic harms the environment, and one wants to know in a very detailed way the effects of plastic and what happens to plastic once it gets into the ocean through the drainage systems, or through the waters from industries. What happens to it? What happens when it mixes with the ocean water? So let us look at some of the things in this book. This book deals with the impact of plastics on the ocean. Contrary to the belief that plastic floats on the ocean water and can be removed, The truth is that it settles at the bottom as tiny particles. So there are many processes out there now. Science and technology are advanced enough to clean the ocean water and to get the plastics out of it. But what happens is the plastic is reduced to grains, and sometimes the bits of plastic are so small that they escape these machines and they settle to the bottom of the ocean, and they are consumed by the marine life, by the fish and also by the seabirds, leading to disastrous consequences. So, in my mind, when I think of the ocean, I think of the tremendous dangers that human beings have created in the form of poisons and oil spills and plastics. They are deadly for the ocean water. This book reveals startling facts about innocent articles of everyday use, such as cotton swabs, which are used for cleaning the ears. So, and so are the balloons that are released in the air. The cotton swabs, which are used for cleaning the ears, have plastic sticks. So, recent research has revealed large quantities of these plastic sticks discovered in the garbage from the ocean. And what about the balloons? Balloons are made of latex rubber, and they are a great risk for seabirds and mammals because the rubber obstructs the intestines and kills them by starvation. So the rubber goes into their system and they starve and die. Sometimes turtles, they mistake these colorful balloon pieces for jellyfish, and they eat them and get killed. So it is such an irony, whereas the sea or the ocean provides livelihood and resource to human beings through its various riches in the form of gems, in the form of medicines, herbs, in the form of food. The wealth that one gets from the ocean is it is inestimable. And what does a human being give back? We give back the ocean oils, chemicals, pollutants, and plastics. And this book also tells us about the industry's use of plastic. The plastic is intentionally made to have a short life so that people may buy more. And these plastics are cheap and they last long, and as we know, they are not biodegradable. So they create havoc when they collect at the bottom of the ocean. So, as said earlier, books like this, they inspire emotional engagement. When one reads such things, one feels emotionally connected because everyone seems to have some connection with products from the ocean. The ocean is also a part of religions for Visarjan, for worship, for bathing. So the ocean is something that is very mystical, a very poetic and a religious symbol for rituals. And wherever the ocean and rivers were, human civilizations have sprung up there because of the nurturing values in the waters. Ocean water has always helped people survive, but the contrary is that human beings have poisoned it in return. So this emotional engagement, which the climate change non-fiction writers try to convey to their readers, it sort of gets an emotional response. So beyond facts and figures, non-fiction writers often use powerful narratives to elicit emotional responses. So the book that we just talked about the plastics, it tells us so much more about the ocean than we could have known as ordinary laymen. It gives a very, very detailed study of why plastics are used, how they are made, and what they become when they reach the ocean. For example, stories of climate refugees, communities displaced by rising sea levels, or indigenous populations fighting to protect their land from deforestation help personalize the issue. For example, Naomi Klein's This Changes Everything combines storytelling with political analysis to show how ordinary people are impacted by corporate exploitation of the environment, galvanizing readers into action. So, an important book by Amitav Ghosh, which would be considered fiction, but is a part of non-fiction too, because in this book, The Hungry Tide, he talks about people who depend on the ocean, upon the sea waters. He talks about the Sundarbans. So, the actual non-fiction elements are very strong in this book. He tells about the communities of these people who are suffering, these people who are on the shores who are suffering, how they try to fight back. They form groups and communities to fight back exploitation and the impacts of climate change. Driving collective action. Books like The End of Nature by Bill McKibben emphasize the need for a collective response to climate change, highlighting the roles that governments, corporations, and civil society must play. These writings often go beyond awareness raising to outline concrete steps that individuals and institutions can take to mitigate the crisis, from reducing carbon footprints to supporting policy changes. So, these books also drive collective action. For example, this book, that's The End of Nature by Bill McKibben, they influence public policy, and they influence corporations and civil society, and they go beyond this awareness raising campaigns to showing concrete steps that individuals and institutions can take to mitigate the crisis, to reduce this carbon footprints, and to support new policy changes. So let's discuss some more books which drive collective action. So we will be discussing some more books which are in this category. So how do authors use non-fiction to influence public policy and perception? So we know that fiction has a sort of attraction to it, with its very refined prose and the element of fantasy, also the touch of romance in it, whereas non-fiction is about bare facts. So how do the authors of non-fiction manage to influence public policy and perception? Framing climate change as a political issue. Klein, for example, argues that neoliberal capitalism is incompatible with sustainable environmental policies, and she advocates for alternative economic models that prioritize equity and sustainability. So this word, this capitalism, it's an important word that is used by Dipesh Chakravarti also, and it is capitalism versus nature. So when one has to talk about environment and nature, and we have to promote its safety and healing, then the neoliberal policies have to be changed to alternative economic models. This is what she says. This is what is said in this book, And so policy needs to be framed which prioritizes equity and sustainability. So, by framing climate change as a systemic issue, writers like Klein encourage policymakers to address the root causes of the crisis rather than just its systems. So, let us stop here. We will continue in the next lesson and we will discuss some more books that talk about how public policy and public perception is influenced, how climate change resolutions are brought about. Thank you.